All right, so there's a lot of lists, right? We've discussed this. A lot of people with lists that have come out. It gets a lot of discussion. EA Sports has been putting out from offense to defense to whatever else. And now the next one, the power rankings. When it comes to college football, these are the top 25 teams according to who they are based on now within the system of college football 25 that gets released here in a couple of 3 weeks or so. I go down to the top 10. Is there anybody in the top 10 that you go, there's absolutely not. You can discuss who's too high or too low, but is there anybody inside the top 10 that you think is an absolute why are they in the top 10?
No. Not in the top 10 for sure. I think the top 10 is, outside of, I think if you get, you could be like, oh, is this team 7th or 6th or 8th or 9th, whatever. No, I don't think that there is. I have a problem with the top 10.
You don't have an issue with Clemson?
I have an issue with how high they are, but if they were 10th and Utah was 6th, I would be fine with that. Like, I feel more confident about them than I do about Utah, or Utah than I do about Clemson. But I think Clemson's a little bit high, but
that's not the game we're playing, like he just said. Yeah,
you have more confidence that Utah will end up higher
than Clemson. Yes,
than Clemson. Okay.
Yeah, I think they've got a deeper roster, more apt to their conference where they'll lose less games.
Yeah, based on the question you asked, Clemson,
what does it matter?
It's a little bit high maybe for them, like you said, so not a big deal. But I just wondered because I know you always have a knowledge and a feeling on Clemson. Well, so they make sense where they are. Maybe a little bit too high. So top 10 wise, I think that's okay. I don't think there's anything that's just like a smack in the face to college football fans out there if you want to eliminate the whole, they're 2 spots too high kind of conversation.
No. Here's my thing about Clemson. They still Dabo Sweeney, and he's proven this over the last couple of years, that in spite of the fact that he does not go fishing at all the ponds that you should go fishing at, he is still a very good, if not one of the best high school recruiters. They keep most of their guys. And he's going to win most of his games. The problem is that when they play teams, and the conference is getting better now, when they play teams that are at their level or even slightly above where they weren't before, that's where they're going to lose and find themselves on the outside looking into the playoff conversation because – Miami went out and got Damian Martinez and guys like that because they had holes to fill and they were upgrades. And Clemson lost Andrew Makuba to Texas. Now, they didn't lose a bunch of Andrew Makubas. They lost a couple. But him in particular, that's an All-American safety that you've replaced with a guy who didn't play very much. So they're taking risks that others aren't. Otherwise, they're still going to win 9 or 10 games a year. So why am I going to nitpick that they're 6th instead of 10th when they're probably going to be in playoff contention until the end?
Okay, well, we wanted to discuss who's in the 10 that kind of like maybe – you were like, wait a minute. But one of the things is that you could have another top 10 that there's a couple that aren't in it that of the ones outside that could be in it, whether it's Missouri or is it Florida State or whoever else. But there we are with that. There's Colorado again, just outside the top 15, and EA has done. They're like not a Colorado hype machine, but they are very high on the Buffaloes.
Well, they're on it. They're certainly not a hype machine, but they're certainly riding the primetime train.
Yeah, and a lot of people are, and we refuse to get on that. Although, hey, we're looking forward to covering Colorado. We're just not going to go overboard with the let's mention them for the sake of mentioning them, so that 5,000 more people potentially watch. I mean, I know that's the gist of why you talk Dion all the time. For some people, but I don't find that all that interesting, even though it always gets a big reaction. Now, if he does something that warrants being talked about, that's fine, but like the propping up of them, I feel like, is just a little bit silly. And look, if they turn out to be a top 10 team, then I'll be the first one in line to say, hey, EA Sports and whoever else you want to mention, like, y'all nailed that. I don't know how. I don't know if it was just blind faith or what, but y'all nailed that. But I just don't know what they're seeing that leads to that conclusion.
Well,
it's Shedeur and Travis Hunter. I don't want to get bogged down in Colorado, but that's a team that you definitely look on this list and you say, like, okay, I guess. Like, I don't think that really makes a whole lot of sense, especially when, you mentioned Missouri. They're not even on this list, are they? They're not even on the top 25. I know people, like, there's some higher on them than others. But I think they at least warrant a top 25 mention. The one that stands out to me, though, is no K-State. I'm glad Oak State got a little bit of love there at the end. They, for returning as much as they are not really getting a lot of love in the preseason. So to see them on the top 25 is a little bit of that respect. But, yeah, no K-State's interesting. But
Four Big 12 teams are in it.
Yeah, but, I mean, they're in that handful of teams that are typically going to be on all of these preseason lists. Kansas is one of those teams. Arizona is one of those teams. Oklahoma State should be one of those teams. K-State, Utah. And then, Colorado thrown in there as well. So there's 5 teams from the Big 12 on this one with no K-State. But, yeah, that's another one that just jumps out to me that I'm sure people could quibble over, but not the biggest deal in the world. It's just a list from a video game at the end of it.
All right, so there we are with that. Again, we could go all day on this, and we might, but we also want to get into a couple things. Sam Kahn, by the way, theathletic.com, will join us at 3:30, and I did give him a tease about if you went into a coma as a college football fan in 94, what would be the most surprising parts when you woke up sometime this month? And he'll join us in a little bit. Craig?
Yeah, I think also if this were the way that it turned out, and this is the preseason, not the postseason, but if Ole Miss spent all that money to finish 15th, I think that would be a disappointment. So, that's just another one that just glancing over this kind of stands out to me.
There you go. Good point. All right, so there we are. There we are. The 4 teams from the Big 12 include Utah up at 10. And then, of course, you have Oklahoma State, Kansas.
5, right? Yeah, there's 5 teams.
Who am I missing? Colorado, Utah, Oklahoma State, and Kansas. Arizona. Yeah. All right, I didn't see Arizona. I'm sorry about that. And they're kind of tucked in that group of 5, last 5 that they do a lot of times with the group of 5 schools. Okay, so now it's an update from BetOnline on what some of the Power 5 or Autonomy 4 conferences. Here are some of the, not movers and shakers, but things that have changed a little bit when it comes to from February, at the end of February, when they had the Power 4 conference lines put out. For example, in the ACC, Clemson and Florida State opened as co-favorites. Florida State is now the sole favorite. SMU has moved past North Carolina and now higher in that part. And Syracuse is bumped up a little bit with 50-1 to 33-1.
If you talk about a hype machine this offseason, Syracuse may be at the top of that list with what Fran Brown's done to make them relevant.
Absolutely,
I think they're going to be a really interesting team to watch. I don't know how good they'll be right out of the gates, but, I mean, they've got a quarterback. I mean, they went and got Kyle McCord. That was one of their first big offseason moves after, the whole situation at Ohio State, and he's really drummed up a lot of interest there. So, yeah, that's an intriguing program.
There's the top to bottom in the ACC as far as the favorites. You see Florida State, Clemson, Miami, Louisville, not a surprise, NC State, and there's Virginia Tech and SMU.
Well, look, they've got some nice runway to get going where until – they play NC State, they're likely to probably be, well, I don't know about Georgia Tech, but they're likely to be favored in most of these games early on. Ohio, Georgia Tech, Stanford, Holy Cross, UNLV before they get there. So before they get to NC State, which is the first ranked matchup they would have based on preseason rankings. But they don't play Clemson. They don't play North Carolina. They play Miami. They don't play Florida State. So you got a pretty good shot there of having a nice little 7-5 year probably, bottom floor for the Qs right now.
Can I say something maybe somewhat controversial, and maybe it's not, but North Carolina don't belong in the same mentions of Clemson and Florida State and all these other teams. I know we talk about them a lot. They've had some good years, but I feel like they're just kind of like automatically getting lumped in, and maybe it's because we talk about them so much because of basketball or through realignment, but would y'all agree with that? I feel like they kind of get mentioned a little bit too often as far as the whole football power rankings go, and I understand why, but who knows how good they're going to be. I mean, they just lost another quarterback. So, but I know what you're saying, Paul. I just feel like they kind of get lumped in automatically now, which I don't know if that's always deserving given who they're being lumped in there with. But, I think Georgia Tech with Haynes King back is an intriguing team. Don't know how good they'll be. So, that Syracuse-Georgia Tech game early in the year, maybe that shows us a little something about both of those teams early on.
All right, let's go now to the Big Ten, where Ohio State remains the favorite. Michigan has been passed by Penn State, and Nebraska's moved up a notch from 75-1 to 50-1. If you look at the Big Ten, Ohio State, Oregon, which is still for me when I saw this earlier, I'm like, Oregon. Okay, no, they're a part of the conference. And then, of course, Penn State, Michigan, that's always been the pecking order. With USC also in that mix among the top 5.
None of this.
Washington's down kind of a pretty good chunk.
Well,
10 years from now, even though I'll know it and I'll be like, oh, yeah. Well, I mean, of course, 10 years from now it can be different again. But if this alignment stays the same for a while, the minute you know it, you're going to forget it. But it will never not look like a misprint to me when you tell me that SMU is getting these odds in the ACC or Oregon is getting these odds in the Big Ten or that Utah is getting these odds in the Big 12. It'll just look like, wait, did you guys not edit this before you sent it in my brain? Like that first thing before it clicks in, like, no, this is how it is. It'll never not look like that to me.
Yeah, when we're watching, and I don't know the schedule off the back of in the top of my head, but sometime here soon, we're watching like Oregon at Michigan in November. It's going to be like, wait a second, what is going on here? And oh yeah, this is a conference game, and yeah, that's where we are now. But like you said, who knows what it's listed as in a few years. But yeah, it's going to take some getting used to and some reminders of, oh, this isn't a crammed together list of the entire top 25. This is just the Big Ten that you're looking at. But Ohio State is number 1. I mean, they seem to be loaded for bear, and very, very interested to see them. Oregon as well seems like they've reloaded pretty well and are going to be a force to reckon with. And then, we'll see with Penn State. I mean, they're always kind of in this range for the most part, always a team that's very well respected, well ranked and all of that. But I don't know how good they are in comparison to the other Big Ten teams, and they have yet to really break through. So maybe this is the year. I don't know. Michigan obviously makes sense because they lost a lot, and the head coaching change as well. So the defending national champions, we're going to get a little bit of a step down, just based off the losses that they had. But
and coaching changes. Yeah,
that's what I mentioned too. So yeah, it's weird to see all these teams listed together, but it does make for a really interesting top of the, like it shakes up the Big Ten maybe better than anybody.
I think so. I think I know the SEC has some alphas. The ACC has a sliver of them, maybe more. Yeah. But man, this is a conference that looks fun. Like it's not like the Pac-12 and the Big Ten. That with what the Pac-12 did last year, and I know some changes, but this looks like it could be very heavy at the top. Very, very heavy.
Yeah, I think so. To go to Penn State for a second. I think right now, given the fact that they have way more experience coming back than Michigan, especially at quarterback, even though Drew Aller is one of those guys he doesn't throw interceptions, but he doesn't really, he's never really led him to anything against the good team. Penn State has to get out of that. I compared him to A&M last time, and a lot of Penn State fans came at me.
Why?
Maybe it wasn't fair. Because Penn State in their conference, kind of like A&M in the SEC, were like, hey, they're good, but like currently, not historically. I'm not talking about historically, but A&M's going to wind up 8-4. Penn State's going to wind up 9-3 because they're going to lose the 3 games to the 3 teams that are on their level. That's kind of where they've been the last couple of years.
They're good. They're not natty good.
Yeah, they're not natty good. They're good. They're always going to be good. They're never like.
I don't think that's fair to Penn State. A&M's had some nice runs, but I don't think they are. They're still a notch below where Penn State has been.
I'm not talking about country club stuff. I'm talking about like right now.
No, I'm talking about the last 10 years. I think Penn State's been a little more consistent.
They're more like. Well, A&M's consistently who they are. Penn State's consistently who they are, and that was my comparison. It's probably you're right. They're better, and they're better, but they're still not great.
The part about A&M that might, if there's a notch that goes their way, it's that they have beaten Alabama.
Yeah.
So they've had a couple of those quality wins.
Like the top 5 yesterday, I mentioned about A&M being a playoff sleeper, and that's just everything goes perfectly for them, which it never does. Yeah. And that's A&M's thing. A&M will beat Alabama and then lose to Mississippi State on the road when that team's got 3 wins. Like, that's what they'll do. Penn State will dispatch everybody that they're favored to beat, but they will not beat anybody that they're not favored to beat. Right. They don't have the ability to upset people. That is James Franklin's way to bear.
Spike Dykes used to be that way. He would win. He'd beat Texas or he would beat somebody, whoever it was, and then he would lose to North Texas.
So you maybe like the inverse of it to where you'll pull off, A&M will pull off 2 unbelievable upsets, but then they'll have 3 losses where you're like, you beat Alabama, but you lost to them?
Yeah, the Penn State problems, they've just been barricaded by Ohio State and Michigan in various intervals, and then whoever pops up and is like that, like Michigan State in some years is really good, and that's But Penn State, I mean, they've won a couple of modern national titles, so that does separate them and put them on a different level. It's been 40 years, but they still are modern day titles. Back in the 80s, right? We won a couple of them, so they're a little bit separated. But I understand the angle you're coming from there of kind of being really good, but not the best in the conference, which has to do some with them and some with who is at the top of the conference.
All right, let's get to the Big 12 and the SEC. The Big 12, according to BetOnline, K-State was the opening favorite. Utah is now the favorite. Oklahoma State has jumped up quite a bit from 16-1 to 7-1. Colorado went from 50-1 to 28-1. There you have the Big 12 with UCF at 4 when it comes to the gambling or the betting odds.
That's KJ.
Yeah, that's the first thing that jumped out to me was saying UCF at 4. I think the top 2 is self-explanatory, and Oklahoma State, I guess everybody feeling like they've been a little bit disrespected has now jumped on that. Hey, let's take care of those odds because Oklahoma State's got a chance to be pretty good. So, yeah, I think Oak State probably about where they should be, I guess, is the way to say it. But, yeah, UCF there is a nice surprise, and I think there's something to that. I think they could be pretty good, guys. Like, they had some struggles last year. They still had a pretty good year considering all the changes, the injuries at quarterback. Like, they still managed to play pretty well. They should have beat Baylor. There's another win that was right there that they just completely threw up all over themselves and lost at home. So I don't think they're being quiet about their expectations. They're also not going overboard with them. So I think they're in a really interesting spot if it all clicks with their transfer portal guys.
Yeah, if they can become a more consistent team, when it comes to win the games that you're in control of, which wasn't just Baylor, it was a couple other games for UCF last year. That's going to be huge.
That Baylor game was just so
I wish you two could have been there with me, but the discussion between me and the rest of the people who cover Baylor was this felt to me like a Guy Morris game. Like it was early on, it was one of those things where, those Guy Morris Baylor teams would go on the road and then they could not have gotten back on the bus faster. Like it was just Kevin Steele, same way, was just like as soon as the game started, it was just like, oh man, just like get to the airport. Hope you guys got a chance to go to Disney World because it's not gonna be fun. But then Baylor gutted it out, which shows that they still had moxie. But yeah, that game was for UCF. That one is one they'll kick themselves for a long time.
All right, so there's the Big 12, and guess what? From Colorado on down, churn those names up however you want, spit them out however you want, almost to a person. Those are the 6 that all of us put in the final 6 or the last 6 when we did our standings or rankings among almost everybody else who has joined us.
Yeah, that's pretty dead on with I think the rankings that I put out the other day when we did these. I'm just looking at, I know there's probably one that's one higher, one lower here and there, but that's vibing with what I thought. UCF is the exception. They're a little bit higher, but
West Virginia might be a little lower based on last year.
Yeah, they are right there on the outside, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, they're expected to be good, but it's like, I can understand you wanting to leap them over TCU, and you can even make a good argument. I wouldn't fight you at all if you want to say that you put them over Texas Tech.
Yeah.
But then beyond that, I do think it's more of a question mark. But yeah, West Virginia's in that weird kind of middle area where they're definitely getting more respect than last year, but they're still not getting a ton of like, hey, you've got a chance to really contend. It's more of like, you should be a bowl team and you should be pretty good, but we don't think you're one of the best teams in the league. And so they've got a chance to disprove that. And they're a unique team that I don't know that anybody has a real great grasp on, especially in light of how surprising they were last year.
Okay, we got to get to the SEC and then break for Sam Kahn. SEC, a couple of changes, nothing at the top with Georgia and Texas 1 and 2. Alabama moved ahead of Ole Miss for 3rd. LSU moving to 5th, getting by Tennessee. Oklahoma moved up from 50-1 to 33-1, and there you see the SEC, at least for now, the odds and winning the conference title.
I think that's more fair to Oklahoma. I don't think that they're right away an SEC championship contender, but I also don't think they're 50-1. I don't think it's that far off. So 33-1 is probably even still a little too far, especially considering A&M is 16-1 right above them in that. So yeah, I would still give Oklahoma a better shot at winning the SEC than A&M, just because tragic things don't befall them the same way that they do the Aggies. I don't know what witch that they hit with their car in the Stephen King novel they're constantly living in, but that's kind of how it is. But there's reasonably 4 or 5 teams that like you think can probably win the SEC, and I think it's those 5 at the top. And Tennessee, Mizzou, A&M, Oklahoma. Like we'll see how they do.
Vanderbilt seems a little high.
250 to 1.
No. Oklahoma there in the middle is just, as an Oklahoma fan, that's what I expected. I haven't been one of those that said they're going to go in the SEC and nothing's going to change. They're just going to be right there. I have my concerns. I have my worries, if you will, about just what life's going to be like post-SEC move. Like, is this a scenario where I'm still used to watching them win 10 games a year for the most part every single year, save for injury or just whatever that gets thrown your way sometimes, but save that, you're winning 10 games, if not more. I don't know, man. Like, when's the last time they were in the middle of preseason conference title rankings?
When Stoops was there the first year.
So 1999?
I don't know where they were ranked because it was the Big 8. No, it was the Big 12. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
so I would think they were probably somewhere in the middle of the pack when it comes to the Big 12.
But that's just, it's weird to see that because they're usually 1 or 2
There's no way
every single year.
Yeah, it was no way since then. They've been always among, if not the favorite, among the top 1 or 2.
I think maybe like 2014 or something, like TCU, Baylor, maybe Texas maybe Oklahoma wasn't top 2. But that's a maybe because pretty much every year they were like a top 2 from about 2000 on. So, yeah, to be in the middle of a preseason conference rankings, it's a whole new world.
Years.
And, I'm very excited about this season because it's so new and it's so different that it's going to be amazing just how fresh it is. But is that going to result in a lot of happy endings when it comes to results? I don't know, man. So I'm hoping to be surprised in a good way.
They did bump up a little bit, so you wonder if there's because of a transfer or here and there, or what people are starting to learn about what they have. We'll see. But there you go. That's the 4 autonomy conferences with a couple of the changes and also where they are best based on BetOnline. When we come back, Sam.